Welcome to the Theory of DFS podcast. I'm Jordan Cooper, the co-author of the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports. It's a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass you can pick up at theoryofdfs.com. We have a change of pace episode since it's, the holiday break, and I don't know, a little added DFS, kind of closed out my account for the year. So I'm bringing on buddy, a long time buddy. This is the first time we've actually spoken in vocal cords, but we've probably been in Discords or Slacks for long periods of time. It's Sammy Reid of both the Guildcast. If you listen to that, which is my favorite listen every Monday or Sunday night during football season, as well as Read 'em and Weep, a poker podcast. And we go way back. We go back to I listened to the Guildcast when it was Fantasy Insiders.
Yeah, we miss those days. The Fantasy Insiders days were the glory of DFS, but as it is, all things must come to an end. But I still have it in the Twitter handle. So
right, but I mean, I know we're going to talk a lot about poker and how like a lot of people. I mean, we've talked about this a lot of times in the industry before. A lot of the good DFS players come from poker. I mean, Roto Grinders was started by, people that started Pocket Fives. And if you go to, Alex Baker was an online pro. Supernova Elite on Poker Stars. And because the mindset is very similar. I mean, there's essentially thinking probabilistically. And going to DFS is, you're doing very similar types of things. It's not sequential like poker is, but if you're good at poker, you probably understand the general game theory of DFS. But how about the reverse? Because you started this podcast where you go over like a hand, good hand and bad hand that you played, and I listened to the first episode is kind of like you played way back in the day, kind of got out of it, transitioned into DFS and fantasy football. And then it's like, you know what? I really love poker. I'm gonna go back and see what it's all about. And I binge listened to every episode of yours, and I noticed like the sentiment like that really stands out to me. I know I'm mentioning a whole bunch of things, but the sentiment that really stands out to me is you said the same thing that I said. So I played poker like 5 years, like professionally, I guess you want to call it. And then everyone. Once, like around 2008, 2009, I kind of not play professionally. I've heard all the stuff about, modern poker is different, right? You hear all the stuff about GTO solvers and all that type of stuff, and then you're like, okay, I'm gonna go to my local card room. I have nothing to do. I haven't played poker in God knows how long. And then you sit down at the table and go, how the fuck is this any different than I remember from fucking 15 years ago? Like where is all this modern poker knowledge or whatever? And it seems like you experienced the same thing.
Yeah, totally. I think that live poker is almost a time capsule, especially like low stakes live poker. 1-3, 2-3, even a lot of 2-5. It's just like it never evolved. It never got out of the Stone Ages, right? I think where you find people who like study solvers and study GTO theory and these sorts of things, you find them playing online. You find them playing 200 Zoom or 500 Zoom on Poker Stars or whatever. You don't really find them at your 2-3 table. I like to say Bob the plumber and Bob the retired lawyer. Like they're not at home studying solver outputs. Like they just have no clue. They just like to go after work and play some cards and that's their thing. And yeah, it's like time has stopped for live poker, which is awesome.
Well, I mean, I relate it to DFS. Like we had 2013, 2014 DFS. I mean, it's way different now than it was back then. I mean, with the amount of tools that are available and publicly available or at least cheaply available, projections and simulation outputs and just people understanding more conceptual just basic statistics on how to play the game well, that poker is similar, but I think the main difference is that in DFS, like, I could play every game practically. I mean, it's like Phil Ivey could sit down at like every poker table in your card room, like in online poker, and have there's no time difference. Like it doesn't, yeah, I could play the $5 games. Obviously, some of the sites restrict you from lower stakes once you get to a certain point. But like, I could play every contest down to $5 on DraftKings if I wanted to. And I relate live poker to online poker very similarly. That I think the gap between online poker now and live poker, I think back in the day, maybe 2003, 2004, was similar. Live poker was still easier. You still found more fish live, but I think as 15 years go by, I think the gap is so much wider. I think it's more like DFS, like if you played the beginner games, like the games where like you get restricted after playing like 50 of them, and like you can't play the experience badge. Once you get an experience badge, you can't play those games at all.
Yeah.
And like to me, that's live poker to online poker now, and it's not like a $1 DFS head to heads versus $1,000 DFS. It's like no, the $1 head to heads are almost as tough as the $1,000 head to heads. But those beginner games, people show me their graphs because I do the podcast, and I'll go, I just started, and I'm playing the beginner games on FanDuel, and I'm playing beginner double ups, and I have an 87% win rate. I go, yeah, good luck doing that outside, and they're like, well, all I do is like pretty much play the optimal, and like people just give me their money because their lineups are so bad. I view that very kind of similarly to live poker now compared to online. That whole concept of like poker's changed. I don't think it has at that level.
Yeah, I don't. I think you're right, and I think the other part is that I still feel like natural talent at poker is important because in DFS, nothing's happening in real time, right? No decisions are really on you in real time. You have all the time in the world to sit down, on your shitter or whatever, and play on your phone and look at projections or do whatever you need to do. You always have some time to like create lineups and think about them if you want to take that time. Whereas in poker, you can't really like use real time assistance. You know what I mean?
Well, unless you're Davis, 3 minutes into his slate, he's already planning out late swaps for when he's behind.
That's very true. Yeah, Davis is puts himself in untenable situations where he's up against the clock quite a bit. That is correct. But yeah, I think that's a big difference. It's like it's really hard to like memorize poker. It's really hard to like do that. At the end of the day, you have to be able to take the things you've learned off the table and apply them on the table. Whereas I think in DFS, you can really sit down and if you have a good set of projections and optimizer, at least for cash games, you can do pretty well.
Right, but even in GPPs, as far as like determining ownership, like to me, I view ownership very like the GTO stuff. I'm putting it in quotes because to really call it, I call it more balance versus exploitative than like GTO. It's very similar to what we talk about here. I want to relate it to like the Nerdy Tenor episode that I did, where he tries to play a balanced strategy, and that really relates to GPPs and ownership, where I'm just trying to play like GTO pokers. I'm just trying to play the players at their efficient ownerships, right? I'm trying to play a portfolio of lineups at its efficient frequency, and as long as the field is not playing efficiently, I'm guaranteed to make money. I can't be exploited, right? But that, as said on the podcast, that isn't the way to make the most money. That's just the way to guarantee yourself plus EV. The way to make the most money is figuring out what the efficient ownership is, and then based on how the field is inefficient, finding the strategy that exploits that field ownership. And that's where we get into, well, if this guy's going to be under-owned, you should be playing him at a higher frequency versus a player that's over-owned that you should be playing at a lower frequency. Like, that, to me, that's what I view, like, that the GTO poker solver type of thing, where I understand its importance in DFS. It's like when people ask me, it's like, I think Miles Sanders is going to be 24% owned, and he's going to be over-owned. He should be 14% owned. And they go, well, how do you know that? It's like, well, we could run sims and everything to do that. I'm a little bit, it's more of an art than a science, right? To use your term. But poker's like that. That is what exploitative strategy is in poker, where you have to kind of at least have a general concept of what like the most efficient way to play in certain scenarios, especially ones that happen often over and over again. And then depending on how your opponents are inefficient, then you could devise strategies. And a lot of times from a GTO quote unquote perspective, you go like completely polar. Like you like once they're off a little, you're just doing stuff like 100% of the time or 0% of the time.
Yeah.
But I'm playing these games. Like I went a week ago. I'm like, no one's exploiting you. Like no one is exploiting you. Like Sammy, I get into situations where I almost psych myself out, where it's like dude, I'm doing this so often, doing this like one line or one thing so often. It's like, how do they not pick up on it? And the really good players, even at the lower stakes, they will start to pick up on it, right? But you'll have half the table that fuck all if they're paying attention to anything at that deep a level, where they're not I'm not getting exploited. Like I would listen to your podcast and you have some lines in your play that I go like, why are you doing that? Like you're not.
Why are you messing around with this theory, buddy? Like, just
right? Why are you Why are you messing around? It's like dude, like you profile the players, and I go, what the fuck are you raising here for? Or why aren't you raising? Because you're up against someone that's going to call 85% of the time in this spot at this moment. Yep. Why let another card out? I mean, I sit there going relating it to the live poker games that I play, and I go, well, if I'm in a spot where I like you have hands. Some of your hands are like, you're in a spot where you have to decide whether or not to 4-bet on pre-flop with like ace little something. And I'm like, dude, I'm just like never in those spots. Like theoretically, I understand the spot you're in, but it's like, if I ever was in that spot, it's very similar to DFS, where if someone's like, I'm always playing in head-to-heads against someone that has like a 2v2 off of me, and it's a very close decision, what do? I go, find someone else to play a fucking head-to-head against. Right? I feel like that type of thing, where I'm listening to a hand going, why the fuck are you playing against this guy? Like, if you have to worry about your 4-betting range to a 3-bet, where in my games that I play, which is similar stakes to yours, like it's like, dude, I can find
they have it, so it's like, why?
Right, they have it. Right, they're like, what? You could just fold here and wait for a better EV opportunity instead of going, I think I have a 1% edge here. Let me go to 280 over a 3-bet with ace little, and just hope they fold a bet. Like, you do not have the best hand when called. You understand the point that I'm making. Like, live poker, it almost feels like in listening to you at least, that sometimes, I'm not saying that you shouldn't learn more, but like it's so similar to my my personality in DFS is like, I'm a nit. And at the poker table, we'll get into like how we play at the table. I'm not a nit at the table, but like I just want to find the highest EV spots.
Yeah.
And like just get away from all the spots where like it's like this. It's like, dude, I could fold and find like a spot where like I have like an 87% equity edge. Like, why am I fucking around? Why am I doing this here? Why am I even bother playing hands against this guy? Is there somewhat a point to that?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll say this. I mean, one of your famous taglines about DFS is play who you want, right? Play who you want, because when you get into the micro of, oh, is this player a good player? Is this player a good play? Sometimes you miss the forest for the trees, and it's like you should just be looking at the macro, right? Make lineups that make sense. It's and you've printed. You're on 8 consecutive years of winning DFS. Like, that's fucking incredible. Like, seriously.
But some people would look at the amounts and go, oh, you're only making, you're making like an entry level. Whatever. It's like, dude, I'm in my fucking pajamas and I wake up at 10:30 in the morning. Go fuck yourself.
Buddy, freedom. Yeah, you don't have to run TPS reports for the man. I mean,
right.
You know how much emotional equity is inherent in that? It's so sick. But I kind of liken poker to that, whereas, the way that I've kind of tried to relearn poker is kind of like this like broad strategic sense. And sometimes I don't just want to make the best plays, right? I want to make the plays that overall, over the long term, like really make me tough to play against, right? And certainly, I kind of cut my teeth at 2-3 and then 2-5, and I'd say in the last like I don't know year, 6 months, I've been playing bigger stakes games, and in those games, I do think having like a balanced, robust strategy is really important. So while I do recognize that a lot of my plays, like in a vacuum, are probably like severely EV at minus EV, it's just like like just fold versus this guy. Why you 4-bet jamming with ace 3 suited? It's just like, well, because the theory, it's like, hey, you gotta have some bluffs in there, and I got a blocker, and yada yada. But that's kind of the way I like it. Is I really want to think about my strategy as a whole. And while I'm not trying to play like perfect GTO, I don't even think I could get anywhere close. I really want to make the overarching strategy of what I do make sense, and that's what makes sense to me.
Well, I think the make sense is important because although we both played for if not for a living, for a substantial amount of income during the same time period. So like basically the boom, the moneymaker boom, right? Like the early to mid 2000s. Like our backgrounds are actually quite different. I primarily played live. Like I was a live poker player. I learned
Oh, were you? Oh,
well, I
Jesus.
learned on let's see, I learned in 2002. I played on Poker Stars and Party Poker, but I played limit hold'em. So I played like $1, $2 limit, and I would play like two to four tables. And
Yeah.
I would study. I would literally, on my way to work, I would print out my hand histories and go through every single hand and go, does this check out? Does this check out? Does this check out? And I read all anything the 2+2 published and the 2+2 forums. I would
Book.
lurk
Yeah.
and read all that, but I got good at limit poker. But of course, with Chris Moneymaker and everything, like no limit like exploded. So like, and then getting like Ed Miller's small stakes hold'em book, and I mean, obviously, I learned through like Theory of Poker, hold'em for advanced players. But then like No Limit Hold'em Theory and Practice came out, so this No Limit stuff came out, and all the fish were playing No Limit. Like you go to on the online 1-2 games were like 10 times harder than the live like 4-8 or 5-10 limit games. And probably the 10-20 games were softer than those also when I was playing them. But then you go to the no limit games, and they're even softer than that at that point. And anyone that makes a big mistake, I could take all their chips at once. So like the live, instead of playing online, I would play in underground clubs in New York City. So like yeah, I would go to Atlantic City every so often, go up to the Turning Stone eventually, Foxwoods or whatever. But like these underground poker clubs, like the primary game that was run was 1-2 no limit, but with a 500 max. So it's not as small. And also, most of the people that buy in would buy in for the max, would buy in for 500. And it was typically an action game. Typically, to see a heads that the common thing is like button open versus big blind, right? Like that's a studyable, like study your open range, open raise hands from the button to the cutoff versus a big blind. How often do you have to?
That's a Vegas game. You go play in Vegas. This
Right.
is how every hand goes.
Right,
Button
dude.
open 3x, big blind defend, check flop, big blind button bets, big blind check calls, turn, check, button bets, big blind folds the next hand. Every single hand. It's so
Right.
sick.
But I see that and I go, dude, I could go days without seeing that scenario. Like I could open under the gun with a tight image to 10x
You're getting $4.
to 10x the big blind. I could do 20 under the gun with a tight with an image of like this guy doesn't play many hands and he only bets with the nuts and still get 4 callers. So like what where am I studying these very, like, everyone's pretty good at the table type of theories? And it's like, no, I learned how to play in action games with deep stacks and small blinds. So
And multi-way pots.
and multi-way pots a lot of the time. So uh so my experience comes from, I started as a very, very tight. I was a nit in these games in the very beginning. Like nit. I mean, literally made fun of being like I was the least action player at the table. The nice people want. I mean, it's not like I was sitting there doing. I knew. I learned how to talk at the table, so it seemed like I was playing more hands than I was. Right, just so I make sure I could get some action. But even playing like that, I was making money because I would still get called. I would still I could bet the nuts and still get called. Now, not as frequently as I should, but then through all of that, knowing, like, I developed the hand reading, like figuring out what other people think of me through having that very tight image of like I'm so imbalanced in one direction that even most bad players, or at least average, below average players, could pick up that when I raise, I probably have top 10 hands, top premium, top 7% of range hands. And I'm like, well, when I bet on the flop, when an ace comes, they think that I have an ace. So when they call me, like, they think I have an ace. Okay, what do I think they have? Like, and then obviously it's hard to get paid off in those scenarios because they kind of like are reading your hand face up, and they're a below average player. So then I learned with the tight image to throw in a lot more flop bluffs, semi bluffs, just so I would get paid off more, right? And bet more and everything like that. But I always knew where my image sat on, like, what other people think I have. So, like, through 2 years, the first 2 years of playing, it was easier for me to read other people's hands because I knew what range they were putting me on. So I considered, like, once I opened up, once I learned more and then started playing much looser and aggressive, like that, I always consider that to be my strength, that I could just walk into these below average player-ish type of games and go, I can narrow everyone's range down extremely easy because I can manipulate my image so that they look at me with certain lines and they're always misreading my hand. Unless it's like a first level player that isn't even paid, like the drunk guy that's calling everything. Like, you just value bet them to death, and like that's monkey poker. So it's like your background, if you were playing online at that time, like you had to have a more robust strategy. I mean, you couldn't do what you wouldn't get away with it. And then eventually, when Poker Tracker and HUDs come into play, like, it would be too easy to read. Like, I'm too imbalanced, even with what I'm doing, and the players are too good, and I don't get paid, right? And I also get bluffed off too many hands. So I feel as if you came from already playing against much tougher competition, that when you sit down at a live poker game now, which is like substantially easier than for what you're used to, like we call FPS, like the fancy play syndrome type of stuff. Like, I view a lot, I'm not saying what you're doing is wrong, it's just that I view a lot of the hands that you go through as like, wow, Sammy's going on reckless adventures, right? Right? Going on a lot of reckless adventures. And I said in the DM before to set up the podcast, I said, so many of our stories of hands are so polar opposite of each other, that you have 80% of your hands are about your best bluffs. And like, if I was doing your podcast, my hands would all be about all my great thin value bets and inducing bluffs. And it's like, you don't even have like so much of that there. Yet we both typically, based on how you play, and at least from the podcast, I think we both present to the players, at least at the games that we play at, as fairly loose and aggressive. Not bad. They don't view us as fish, but they just view us, this guy could have a lot of hands. He plays a lot of hands pre-flop and tends to bet more often than check and fold post-flop. So using that to your advantage, like, to me, like, are there better ways to use that to your advantage. And that's why I would listen to your podcast and go, wow, there's so many spots that you can take advantage. If you don't, why did you have to donk off $1,000 here? Like that money could have been so much better used on something else. Like you make complete sense. I listen to it going, absolutely, complete sense. But it's like, dude, the next hand that you get, you could take off $800 from this other guy. Like, why the fuck are you getting yourself involved in this shit? Do you think about that? Do you think about, do you think in terms of you're playing 9-handed or something like that, and you see 3 people with bigger stacks that don't play well and go, I just want to get in as many hands with those guys? And then you see 2 people that you respect and you go, the edge between us is small, so, like, I'm just not going to go to war with these people. I'm just going to try to fight for the 3 people that have all the chips and just, like, I'd go on those reckless adventures and not reckless adventures where a strong player is open raising and you're 3-betting with fucking 7-8 suited. Like that type of shit.
Yeah, sometimes I do. But at the end of the day, clearly you want to get in hands with worse players. I think that's good. And certainly I think I open my ranges up versus those players. But against really strong players, you know, I tend to kind of go a little more balanced, right? Because, you know, against them,
But what? But the question is, why can't you just play imbalanced and just fold all your best hands, everything other than your best hands?
Oh, because fuck them. That's why. Like,
so it's an ego thing with you. Fuck them.
No. I'd say it's actually not. I think ego is actually a really like poor and destructive thing in poker, and I think in a lot of ventures in life. And you know, I think that the more I've played poker, the more I try to understand that, you know, egos, if you can take the ego out of it, you're way ahead of the game, because ego makes you do all sorts of things that you shouldn't do, that you wouldn't otherwise do, right? Like
you take advantage of that at the table. You wait for someone to make it about the ego, and then you fucking snap off their bluff or some bullshit.
Yeah. Like everybody wants to like come after you or somebody bluffs you. It's like, oh, I got to get this guy back, or oh, this guy's got so many chips and he's so bad, you know, like I just got to go after this guy, all that stuff. Whereas, you know, sometimes it's just you just play your hands and you just kind of do what's right, and you know, kind of sticking to your overall strategy. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't make adjustments. Like you have to. I think what you said at the beginning is so important, that yes, it's good to know the theory. It's good to know kind of the baseline of what, you know, a theoretically correct thing would be to do, but you have to be able to like make adjustments off of that. You have to be able to turn exploits off of that, because you'll never make as much just playing a baseline strategy as you will trying to take advantage of what people do. Now, that doesn't mean that if I see other good players at the table that I'm going to somehow like abandon my strategy, right? I think that I've spent enough time on it and studied enough and all this to where like I'll go to war with anybody, right? Because at the end of the day, they're constrained by all the things that we're constrained with, which is the math of poker. No matter who you are, you're constrained by certain math, you're constrained by certain frequencies. And, you know, I'm not going to shy away from somebody, even though I think it's a less EV spot, because, you know, I play cash games. Like these aren't, you know, it's
right. We're both talking about cash games. Like I was really never really a tournament player.
Yeah, me neither. But I think that's the thing in cash games is it's like you can always take those 1% or 2% spots, because if you're properly bankrolled, like it doesn't matter. You know, you get dusted off, you can just buy back in or whatever. In a tournament, in those close spots, a lot of the times you just want to like get out because you want to preserve your stack. But in cash games, it's not really a consideration. So I'm kind of willing to go high variance in a lot of spots if I think it's right, even if I think there's even a slight.
Yeah, but is it high variance? Like here, let me describe a situation that we get into all the time, that you probably do one thing majority and I do the other thing as a majority. Okay, so let's say, and I love talking about hands. That's why I love your podcast, because it's not just the thing is, Sammy, your podcast is not just about hands. Your podcast is, when you go through your thought process, you could almost learn good strategies from just thinking in terms of like, well, I have this. His range is here. This flop helps my range more than his range. I'm going to bet small because I'm more frequently like once you start going through all this and you go, yeah, okay, and now you could superimpose like what you did on a certain hand good, and I could take it to a hand that I've played and go theoretically, am I thinking in the right way? And it's almost it's almost helping me because I'm listening to some other poker training ish type of podcast, and a lot of it's weird for me to say a lot of it sounds like the theory of DFS and not as pragmatic, right? Like I feel like I'm listening to the advanced course that I made, and it's like, well, if you're not used to some of these concepts at first, even though you may do it, like you may think in terms of the theory of poker, you may think of the 2+2 versions of those concepts and maybe doing them, but you're not used to the terminology and the way that it's, like I would always call, the big bet on the river, and I go, well, that bet is either nuts or nothing, right? Well, that's what polarized range is. Like it's the same exact concept. But like, oh no, I'm doing that correctly also, right? When you overbet the river with the nuts, and you go and you get called because you get called by the bluff catchers. If you think you're gonna, you don't have to care about the value of the other guy's hand as long as they have a bluff catcher. They're gonna call a half size pot bet or a 2x pot bet depending on what you think of them and how they think about the game, but. Like a common thing, like I mentioned, a common thing. Okay, so here's the situation. You're in middle position. You're in. Let's just say you're in the cutoff. Okay, middle position. A very strong player, right? Raises. You're playing 2-3-5. Your game, right? Someone raises to 20, in middle position, and you have pocket tens. Okay. Now let me give you the context of the game. The guy on the button is a loose passive fish, and the guy on the in the big blind is a loose passive fish. And there's already been 3 limpers. What do you do?
I 3-bet.
Right. Exactly.
And you're gonna say, well, I want to call because I want to play multi-way pot with these stinking fish who might stack off. And buddy, I think I don't think
because what I'm thinking when you 3-bet and you have a hand like that, I go, so basically what you're doing is you're isolating the best player at the table, right, to play him heads up in position, which you may have an advantage on against his range because he may be raising with top 28% or 30%, and you have a slightly better range than that. And my thought process is, if I do 3-bet here, like I'm more likely to call in position. I want a 5-way pot, and if I do have the best hand on the flop, I have the strength to understand what everyone else is thinking. So when it does get checked to me, I could figure out what to do. And if someone else other than the pre-flop raiser bets, I could profile their hand much better and either get away on like an 8-high board or fold or, whatever, raise or something. Or what it does is in a 5-way hand, the pre-flop raiser almost needs to play as straightforward as possible, and they're a strong enough player.
They all do, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So now I can narrow everyone's ranges so much easier, and then if I do have the best hand or hit a set, the guy next to me that's good probably doesn't. I don't stack him, but I got 3 fucking other. I got 4 other people that will just overplay. The board comes 8 high. Someone has ace 8, and they want to give me $500 for no reason in a 5-way pot like this. Like, I want to be in those situations, and then if I want to even raise, and I think I have the best equity in this hand, I raise the guy's 15 to 40. Because I want now a 3 or 4-way pot with $40 in it, and it still makes. I'm in position, so I get to control the pot. I get to get a free card if I need it. I get to control everything. And if I get 4-bet by the pre-flop raiser, then I just muck my hand because in these games, once you see that 4-bet, there's
it's always the net.
Right. It's aces, kings. It's something. Yes. So you understand the mindset difference of that's what I do 95% of the time, yet you do 95% of the time. I understand the merits of why you do it, but you have to understand the merits of why I do what I do, because theoretically, what I do, a solver would tell you it doesn't make sense.
Right.
If everyone was playing GTO poker, My thing is everyone ain't. Dude, I have so many imbalanced players in with me. Just like fucking give them to me.
Yeah, let me just tell you. So I have a really good friend. One of my best friends in the world. His name's Josh, and he is my poker buddy. He is a wonderful player. Sometimes it makes me sick how talented he is at poker. He's good at tournaments. He's good at cash games. I mean, he crushes cash games. He has cashed in the main event 2 years in a row. Like, the guy is he's the guy I talk poker with. We sit down and run sims together. We talk theory together. I mean, he is.
Is this the guy that you mentioned? You had one episode, because remember, I binge listened to like the whole thing in a week.
Yeah.
You had one hand where you asked your friend what to do, like, and he said something about like a min raise type of situation.
Yeah.
That's one of the episodes where I'm sitting here and I literally, before you even mentioned it, I'm yelling at the phone, going. Raise, this is a raising spot, and most likely I'd more likely small raise here. And then you mentioned it's like, yeah, my friend said that he would have min raised, and I think that's a very creative whatever. And I'm just sitting there going, it's not creative, it's the fucking best thing to do. What the fuck are you doing? Is that the same friend?
It's the same friend. It's the same friend. I did back-to-back episodes where we went on this trip to Vegas, and that's my friend who I went with, and he is more like you, Jordan. He wants to play multi-way pots with really bad players, and he kind of seeks out. We have a card room up here called the Oaks Card Club, which is just like so actiony. The players are so bad. Basically, the 2-5 players there are like 1-3 quality.
Okay, that's the best scenario if they're buying it for 1,000.
Oh yeah, it's so great. And he goes late night when these scrubs come in and they're just dusting off stacks. And this is kind of what he does. He just goes supermax exploit, and he kind of feels like his post-flop edge is so great that it's going to kind of overcome, exploitative pre-flop mechanics, right? And I think that's exactly what you're saying. And so him and I argue all the time. He's like, all right, let me start with this hand. This guy raises, I call him, like, no! And he's like, yes, I did. And so we have a real difference of opinion there, but I think what it really comes down to, and this relates back to DFS a lot, is there's more than one way to skin a cat. You know what I mean? Do what you want, like play how you want, but as long as it makes sense, either through a GTO standpoint or an exploitative standpoint versus certain player types, you can make any way successful. You know what I mean? You can be more of a post-flop player or a pre-flop player, even though I don't necessarily I think those things are more related than most people give it credit for. Would agree with you.
Right. The point that I'm, from a macro standpoint, is making, like, in relation to that, is that if we think theoretically, so think about it very theoretically, that if we're playing now, I'm the type of player that very similar to you, that if I'm in late position, I'm pretty much opening. I'm raising with any hand that I'm playing. Like, it doesn't, like, I'm not limping over 6 people with pocket sevens or ace little suited, or like, no, I make 12. And most of the time my bet sizing pre-flop in these types of games will give away nothing about my hand, because I do the same thing all the time. So that's what I want them to think. I want people to aces 12. Nothing 12, 6x, whatever the standard is. Sometimes it gets really nitty, and the standard is like 7 or 8, right? And then sometimes it gets really wild, where like you could go 25 and get 5 callers. So it's like whatever that number is. And the thing is that from a theoretical standpoint, if you're playing with that wide of a range, right, which is not absurdly wide, but more towards the GTO wide, kind of, because most people from 20 years ago think that range is nuts, right? They go, what are you raising 8-6 suited for on the button with like 4 limpers? And I'm like, that's what I really should be doing, especially against the profile of people at the table. I'm in position. I'm going to get 5 callers and get to control the pot with a nutted hand.
Let's go.
Right. So, but to the rest of the table, I look like a maniac, right? Yeah. Post flop, I'm much narrower, but to them, I look like I'm a laggy, whatever the fuck.
But you're in a lot of pots, and you're pressing out in pre-flop, yeah.
Right, but the thing is, from a theoretical standpoint, the calls that I get on that bet pre-flop are much more in line with the proper equity of the player's hands, even if they're playing an even wider range, right? So like if I raise to 12 and I have aces even, or whatever I have, if I'm going to get 4 callers, the guy that's calling with Jack 3 suited is minus EV, but he's not so significantly minus EV compared to calling me on the river with third pair when I bet the size of the pot with top 2. Like that is such a big EV spot that they're actually making people think in terms of, oh, you play garbage, right? Oh, bad players play garbage cards starting hands. And I'm like, based on my style of play, they really have I'm getting the least amount of edge from them calling with garbage, but I'm allowing myself to get into situations where they're on the turn on the river and they're making insanely bad EV decisions. So I'm, from a macro standpoint, I don't want to exploit the smaller edges pre-flop. I want to get into as many situations where I can exploit the turn on the river against people that will make much bigger mistakes. So like your macro 3-betting thing kind of eliminates the amount of opportunities. So like you said, different ways to skin a cat. And you say on the podcast, you like playing less hands in high frequency, right? In high intensity. And I'm the type of person, it's like I play more hands in less intensity until we get to the turn of the river, and then we may start seeing a lot of chips go into the pot. And I'd say most of the time when there's a lot of chips in the pot, I'm gonna win the pot, right? Yeah. I just want to get there as quickly as possible against the worst players. So that's why when a strong player that I respect on how they play makes it 12 to go in a 1-3 game or something like that, like I look down at 6-8 suited and I just muck the hand. Like I either muck the hand or I'm like, is this going to be a 6-way pot? And I'm in position. Okay, I'll call. Like, you understand how the macro strategy changes. That's why you're not doing anything wrong. I just think that we're really on the polar opposites of like just even the way we think about how we make money playing poker.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true because obviously listening to the podcast, you realize that I'm pretty bluff heavy, right? But I can't be as bluff heavy if I'm playing too many hands, right? And so that's kind of my thought about the whole thing of like pre-flop to post-flop, right? Because yes, the edges post-flop are bigger in terms of an EV count because the pot's bigger, obviously, right? So those mistakes that people make on later streets are just going to cost them more money because there's more chips in the pot. And I think that's absolutely true. But the way I think about pre-flop is it's a road to post-flop. And so what most people do is they play too many hands. And that causes them to be imbalanced because at some point you have to do something with the hands, right? That's just the physics of poker. You have to do something with those extra hands. You either have to fold them, or you have to call them, or you have to bluff with them. But in any way, you're going to be doing one thing too much. And so the big mistake that I think most players make is they do play too many hands, right? And so to me, the post-flop, the pre-flop edge is creating post-flop edges where those players either fold too much to my pre-flop aggression or they end up doing something too much on later streets when the pot's bigger. Now, you're taking advantage kind of specifically of when they call too much. And I think that most players, especially at lower live stakes, that is their main challenge, right? That is their main league as the population goes. As you move up, people's leaks are a little less pronounced. But if they're playing too many hands, they're still bound by these physics, these frequency borders that they either have to do something too much, fold, call, or raise, or whatever that looks like. And that's where you get these like player types, right? If you're playing too many hands and you fold too much, you're a loose passive, right? And if you bluff too much with those extra hands, you're a loose aggressive. And if you call too much, you're just a payoff wizard.
The favorite player type that I do best at the card rooms, especially I came from action games, but a lot of times at least for the past 10 years, whenever I go, I'm typically going on a Tuesday afternoon, right? Something like that. I'll sit down at the table, and it's like it's a weak tight game. Like it's totally weak tight, and basically I just run the game over, right? Just you could literally run the game over, and you could the reason why I like it's the most fun form of poker because the loose passive action games, like there's going to be a showdown every hand. It's like you have to show a hand, and it probably has to be higher than one pair, right? But the problem is a lot of the weak tight players in those games play too many ace jacks and queen tens and hands that play better one pair head to head type of thing. And I'm mucking those hands in those. And like, look, dude, just like, dude, ace queen under the gun in those games, I just fucking fold. Like, it's just like, this is not a profitable hand in a 7-way raised pot with people that are going to go with gut shots. Everything's going to the river, and it's probably going to be a 4-way call on the river. Like, fuck you. I ain't winning with it. Like I need to make better hands. I need to make more nutted hands. Right. But weak tight players don't think that way. The thing is that in weak tight games, what they do is they overfold. So like, when players overfold too much, like I could just sit down, no one knows who I am, and in the hijack, cutoff, and button, I'm like literally raising every single orbit, like in that position, no matter what, like as long as no one raises. And the thing is that the pot isn't raised like 90% of the time because the only time anyone at this table raises is with like jacks plus or something like that. So it's like, so I'm raising, and then the thing is, in the beginning, they don't know what the fuck I'm doing. So it's like I have to give them credit. They think I have a hand. So I'm just going to bet any texture of board that they would think that my hand hits, right? And ace comes up, and I see, and these tables I see bet nearly 100% of the time because they overfold too much. It's fit or fold mentality, and if they don't hit it, they don't hit it. And if they do, if I get check raised, I'm done because like they have better than one pair because they think I have one pair.
Always. And I think that goes back to your point earlier about if somebody's imbalanced even a little bit, like they're overfolding even a little bit, the proper adjustment is just to go 100%, the other way, to see that 100%, because that's going to yield the biggest advantage. And
but Sammy, the biggest that isn't, but that's the byproduct of the biggest advantage. The biggest advantage is when you go back and forth. The biggest advantage when you sit down at the table, raise every late position hand, c-bet every flop, and if I'm not getting called enough, I periodically lower the frequency. And I periodically fold more, like, because they haven't seen my hand, and I know that they think that I'm a laggy person. So I know that I'm gonna now get called at a much higher frequency. They're gonna open up their ranges. So now when I raise on the now I'm raising ace 10 suited or higher, and they're gonna put me on God knows what. And then you see bet the flop, and now next thing you know, they're calling off pot size bets with second pair type of thing. And then once you show them that, then you go to the other way. Then you go the other way, and you constantly go back and forth based on what your image is. And then in the beginning let's say in the beginning, you are showing down the best hand on the river, even though you're raising every hand, they're going to give you more credit for a hand, even though you're raising every hand. So now I'm bluffing more, right? So now, like, to me, the EV outcome is not necessarily even in the hand that you're playing at the current moment, but in all subsequent hands that you're playing against the same people at the same table. And that behavior that is innate to me comes from the fact that in online poker, you see people come in and out. It's just screen names and things happen all the time. And when you play private games in the clubs in New York City, like, dude, I could, on Thursday, I'm playing against a guy that I've probably played 600 hours of poker again. Like, most of the table, like, I've played substantial periods of time with, where it's like, well, I know pretty much how this guy plays, and he kind of has a sense of what I do, and I fuck with him by going back and forth, and they never adjust anything. So, like, that's why when I listen to your podcast and you go, well, you're doing this, like, dude, I could, like, the better I could profile the below average players, the good players will play balanced enough that I see that my EV advantage over them isn't. It's almost not even worth playing. That macro mentality of when I sit down at the table is like, let me profile as many of the players as possible, and then determine who do I want to play my hands against and who do I not want to play my hands against, and then play 8 to 10 hours and just that's it. I the guy I played this past fucking Tuesday. The guy sitting right on my right was a good player. I don't how good, who knows, but someone that completely I would respect their play. And it's like, I don't know, there was like, I barely remember a hand that we were at the river and it was just me and him. I mean, I can't even remember a hand, but like there were two guys at the table, like dude, I'm in every hand with them. And getting back to the point of like, in theory of DFS, I say that the number one thing that will affect your ROI is your opponent, the strength of your opponent, the relative strength between you and your opponents. And it's very similar to that theory of poker, David Sklansky, 2+2 type of thing of like the single most important choice that you make when you walk into the card room is what table you sit at. So do you feel as if, like, if you have no choice other than to sit at a table with a lot of strong players, do you feel as if you would make more money playing against softer opponents, or do you believe that there's an edge? You understand what I'm saying? It's like everything that you do goes against my, like, why don't you just find the sucker at the table and then stack them, and or bluff them out of a pot, or do all that. And a lot of your hands are interesting, but you go through the thought process of your hand, and I go, if you're playing against a guy with that range, like, why the fuck are you sitting there? It's hard for me to not think it's hard for me to go, like, dude, you describe, oh, loose passive fish there, whatever, and it always seems like by the end of the hand, you're in with the player that you shouldn't be in the hand. All these other people fold, and it's me and Mr. Other shark player in its ego contest, and we're swinging dicks. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely does happen, but I absolutely think that game selection in poker is massive. And what Sklansky said, the most important decision you make is what table you sit down at. 100%, 100% of this. You're always going to make more money from bad players because their imbalances, they're just going to be more obvious. You'll be able to take advantage of those better than you will a good player. 100% of the time.
Do you not tell those stories as much because they're just boring?
Yeah, I don't think that they're as interesting, right? Like,
right, because bet call, right? But third size pot bet, half size pot bet, full size pot bet call to TPTK, and they fold is not. It's just like, oh, calling station, value bet, make money. What's really that interesting about that?
Exactly. There's plenty of hands that happen like this. When I do an episode, I talk, 2 hands, maybe 4 hands out of hundreds that I've played, right? You can't get all the little minutia of it. It's not a poker vlog where I get to show you every hand that I was involved in. And we were talking about this over DM. I definitely think that, the number one thing you can do in poker to make a lot of money is just value bet well, right? There's other aspects, but if you value bet well, I mean, you'll get called. And I think the imbalances of the population, like we were talking about, at the lowest stakes, people call too much. And they call too much with weak hands because they arrive in these situations post-flop with too many hands. And so their default is to use them as calls. That's their big imbalance. And kind of what I found is you like go to 2-5 and 5-10 is that the imbalance comes, these people don't, the population anyways, they don't stack off as much with like one pair with bluff catchers, right? What they do is they're too weighted toward looseness on early streets, pre-flop and flop. And then once you get to the turn and river, they will overfold to big aggression.
That's correct.
That's the exploit that I found in the population is, when I first started coming back to poker, man, I was playing just like you were playing. Like, I was just like, dude, all you got to do is sit around and make hands. And these fuckers will just pay you. That's all you got to do. They will pay you, and you don't have to do anything else. And
But you
buddy,
could do. But you could do. The thing is, I agree with you. You could do more. Like there's that. Absolutely. The point that I'm making is that where you do the more, I'm less inclined to go on reckless adventures. It's so weird. Like this is why I wanted to have this conversation, and I don't care if people are listening, going, "Well, what does this have to do with DFS?" Well, hopefully you're getting something out of it. Maybe it relates, but it's my podcast, and I felt like fucking talking.
It's all theory of gaming and gambling.
Right.
First off, and secondly, just buy Blender's course. I mean,
right.
Just easy, yeah. Just
right.
Buy it and print.
But like in the situation, like you go through hands, and I if you have any interest in poker, like truthfully, like Sammy, your podcast is excellent. It's entertaining, and you could learn, like you could learn how to play good poker just by the stuff that you say. And I don't want to put this out like oh, I disagree with everything that, like 90% of the stuff that I like, you go, oh, this is how I played my hand good, and I go, yeah, you played that hand well. Right? Or you play the hand badly. Go, yeah, you fucked that one up, right? Right?
It happens all the time too, doesn't it?
But the main thing that annoys me about your podcast is that it doesn't provide the context that is my strength. So I need to, like, you're a broad-based, and you said it before, you have a broad-based strategy that you could apply to a lot of different profiles of players. And you could rely on it. Like it said in GTO, quote unquote, poker, that if you're not good at reading hands, if you're not good at profile, if you're not good at image play, if you're just like, I don't know these 8, 9 people, whatever, at the table, or you're playing 6-handed, 5 people, whatever, and you're like, I'm not sure. Well, now you have this baseline of like, well, if I'm not sure, I'm just going to play the least exploitative way that no one can exploit me. I'll try to stay as close to that. And worst case scenario, I break even, but I'm not doing anything long-term negative EV. And I play with a much more narrower micro strategy of like, I'm going to get in, and I know it's so similar to how I play DFS. Like it's in DFS, I say that my ownership, like I make adjustments to ownership based on what I think everyone else is going to do. And I believe that my judgment on that is more accurate than any industry projections, although it relies on the fact that I'm going to be wrong sometimes, right? Like this guy's going to be like 20% owned, and he should be 12, and he ends up coming in at 6%, and I go, what the fuck happened there? Or I think this guy's going to be low owned, but everyone thinks that guy's going to be low owned, and he comes in at 22%, and I go, well, my lineups are fucking awful now, right? I didn't mean to play that high owned a player in that spot, right? Like that type of thing. So when you play poker in a highly exploitative way, when you're narrowing people's ranges down much, much more than like anyone thinks broad-based wise, you're just opening yourself up to be majorly wrong, and you could spew a lot if you're wrong often. Sure. And I just rely on the fact that I'm right more often than wrong.
Right, and you can get exploited by good players that are paying attention, but the reality of live poker is that the majority of players out there are inequipped. They are fully inequipped to be able to take advantage of your weaknesses, to take care of.
Dude, if someone to my left 4x 3-betted me every time I raised, they'd make a fortune. Do you know how much of a fortune they'd make? You'd right. I wouldn't. Fuck you. I'm sitting on the other side. I'm sitting. Right? Because you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna raise with only my premiums and wait for you to fucking 3-bet me. So like, because the thing is, I wouldn't be able to limp against you because you'd look at my open limp and go fuck yourself and fold your hand, because there's no fucking way that you'll ever see me open limp, right? But the things that we're joking about, like it's amazing to me that it's 2023 almost, and people have said poker's gotten better. And I sit at a 2-5 game, and I go, where has it gotten better? Where I know I'm playing absurdly imbalanced, and no one is noticing. Like no one is noticing, and I'm. It's almost like monsters under the bed type of thing. Like I got to stop doing this because someone like, and then what happens is I'll get 3-bet by someone, and I'll go, is he fucking with me? Is he fucking with me? Is he fucking with me? Like he's seen me raise like fucking 700 times in this spot. He's 3-betting me because now he's doing it with air. And then I muck, and then he shows me aces, and I go like, "No one's noticing. No one's noticing."
He's got it. I mean, I'll tell you. So I've been, if you've listened to the latest episodes of the podcast, and I haven't put out a ton during holiday season here, but I've been playing pretty regularly in this private game that gets, it gets as big. The other night, it turned into a 5, 10, 20, 40. I mean, it's a pretty big game, and even the players in this game, like, they're not very good. Even the okay players are just not like super equipped to like take advantage of your imbalances. And I think Blender, and it kind of relates to something you're talking about, your projected ownership and what you think the field is going to do based on that. I think really relates to poker in the sense that knowing solver outputs, knowing GTO and stuff like this, it's not as important to apply it yourself, but it really helps you understand the imbalances that other people have.
Right.
That was the biggest thing when I started and I'm not a huge like solver head. I don't hang out and run sims all day, but I work with them a little bit. But I think the biggest thing is like once you understand what the approved GTO strategies are, you can see how far other people are diverging from those, and it just makes their imbalances a lot clearer to you, if that makes sense. Like before, you're like, oh yeah, this guy's really loose, or this guy's really aggressive or something like that. But once you understand solver outputs, you can kind of refine that a little bit and be like, oh yeah, well, he's too loose pre-flop, but he overfolds here, or he doesn't aggress enough here. It just makes it a little more, I don't know, like detailed. And I think that, like I said, ties into what you're saying about ownership projections versus how's the field going to adapt and try to take advantage of those ownership projections.
Right. It's like the ownership projection could say that Derrick Henry is 20% owned, but he's facing the Texans. So, like, everyone is going to play this fucking guy. Like, I don't care that everyone's, 20%, no, 35%. God, fuck you. That's what real people do, right? They go, the Texans run defense and Derrick Henry, got to play him, right? Like, have you
seen Derrick Henry's last 4 games against the Texans? I mean, yeah.
Right. When you could play Nelson Aguilar in cash, you got to do it. Those fucking Aguilar teams beat me when they play fucking Hawkinson in the tight end spot. Those motherfuckers,
buddy. Or you're just like Davis and you late swap to the nuts.
Right.
Yeah. It's very, very brutal. But talk a little bit. I just kind of want to hear like what your experience has been. Besides that, everybody's bad. Like, what did it feel like to like be back on the felt? Like, how did it make you feel? What was going through like your body?
It was. I may not project it, but I have a lot of imposter syndrome. Like I may not project it, but I'm always in the sense of like I could always be learning. I don't know it all. Never get into that mindset of you know it all or any like I think that's horrible. Now when I'm teaching, I'm typically teaching concepts that I believe that I have mastered. Doesn't mean that there's nothing more to master, but typically so I can be confident in like, yeah, this theory, this thing, that strategy. And of course, we're dealing with both poker and DFS where there's no such thing as a black and white there's no right or wrong. There's more likely or less likely type of situations. And then the context, like every hand is different. Every opponent is like there's so many permutations of things, of variables, that there's no like definitive like the same way in DFS of like probably don't play, like you could say, well, don't play an injured player that's going to get 0 points. It's like, well, in certain showdown contests when the guy's 200 and that's the only way to stack the 5 studs, like that could be in the winning lineup. So even that is like that. It's like in poker, it's like here's the thing that's always correct. If a guy shoves all in on the river and shows his hand and it beats yours, don't call. Like there you go. Or when it's checked, like the biggest mistake is if you have the nuts when checked on the river, like never check. Like that would be always wrong. Like even betting $1 is better than checking because you have the nuts and you're last to act on the river. Like those are like pure 100%, but everything else is all over the place. But I sat down. I have not played poker in 6.5 months. I played in Las Vegas when me and my wife went for wrestling for Double or Nothing at AEW. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go on Tuesday. With Sammy, I don't mean to sound like I'm the best or anything like that. But I felt like 10 minutes in, I felt it was like riding a bike.
Yeah.
I didn't. But the thing is, I every time I go to play poker, which is months apart at this point from the past 5 or 6 years, I always go in going, these guys know more than me. These guys know, like, it's going to be harder. This is whatever. I'm going to be horrible at reading hands. I'm going to play too tight. I'm going to whatever like that. And like within 10 minutes, it's like, I feel like it's 2005 again. Like, I feel like I'm literally sitting down to play a 12-hour session like I do 6 days a week in New York City. And it's similar-ish type of like, and I go through the hands, and I go through and I think, should I have done this, and should I did I have a cigarette, and I think through hand, I go, I think I'm playing extremely well. Like what, and I almost think to myself, how am I playing well? Like, I don't understand. Like, what, shouldn't I be rusty? I don't. Is that the opposite of what you're supposed to? Like, aren't you supposed to be rusty?
I mean, yes and no. I think the way that you play, and I think we're both very similar in that, we kind of get our kicks from these mental challenges, right? Mm-hmm. This problem to be solved. Can I solve it better than other people can solve it? And once you get to a high level, you're not even competing against other people, really. You're competing against yourself, right?
Right. A lot of the times, the things that I kick, like it's the weak player. It's very similar to DFS, where people, like, when they win, they go, well, I'm great, and that was awesome. And when they lose, they go, well, I was either unlucky, or what did I do wrong, right? When they lose. I beat myself up over the hands where I'm driving home from the card room going, I made $220 that hand, but could I have made $400? Like, oh, yeah, and then I think of a situation, go, I could have, that wasn't the maximum on that hand. Yep. That sucks. Right, and it's like, oh, well, you made $1,600 in 8 hours of a fucking 1-3 game, and I'm like, should have been $2,500, right? Like, but to me, that's a sign of a good player. Like, the bad players are ones going, like you see at the table, where they check behind with 2 pair on a board where, like, I'm gonna catch so many bluffs here. That why aren't you betting like a quarter of the pot? I'm calling like all the time here, and you don't get your thin value bet or something like. Thanks, like thanks for not costing me $80, and I'm like, those are the situations where if I'm on the other player's end, I'm fucking going to the nearest wall and just bashing my head in, going, how the fuck did I not get $80 extra there, right?
Yep. Well, and it's all DFS and poker. It's all process versus results. It's not, oh, I won, 2 buy-ins here, so I played great. It's not, oh, I lost 2 buy-ins here, I played terrible. It's like, that's almost incidental, right? Obviously, you look at your DFS results over a full year, and that'll tell you at least pretty well how well you played. Even then, there's a lot of variance inherent, but like any single slate, any single poker session, the results of it mean just about nothing. But if you're really good at examining your own process, being self-aware and really honest with yourself about, did I play well? Did I make the right decisions, etc. I think you're way ahead in the game. And, like I said, I think we both get our kicks from, trying to solve problems. And when I'm on the poker table, man, it's just, I feel so happy because there's always a problem to solve. It's like, oh, here's a hand, here's a problem, right? Here's a player, like this player is doing this, like, man, like I got to figure this out. How do I exploit this person? And man, it's just, I love live poker. I really didn't play it much back in the day. I was an online pro, and I just like clicked buttons and, tried to do the right thing. Once I started playing live poker, I was just like, dude, this is incredible. Like, I love it so much. It's like my thing now. And
because the thing is that the problems that you're trying to solve are much more directional and conceptual rather than looking at VPIP. Like, well, what's his VPIP? What's his fold rate over here? What's it like you're looking at spreadsheets and
Yep.
doing that is it's the same thing. To me it's the in DFS of like, oh, I'm playing double ups. Let me press the optimal button and play that, and like that's like 30 seconds, and be like,
Didn't you do that one year? You just played
for NBA,
the
NBA on FanDuel, I just did that on
optimal.
for NBA on every slate, and made 20 grand. And it's like what like. But understand, it's because I was eligible at the $1 and $2 level. So just understand that I was able to get a lot of volume at lower stakes.
Yeah.
But at the live poker to me is it. There's no DFS equivalent really to it, but you start thinking so much more. Like you get so much more nuance from the players. Like there's in online poker, it feels like it's like, oh, you describe someone like you have these like categories of like 6 to 8 player types, right? And you're like, okay, there's like, but at a table you get so much context of like, is this guy down? Is this guy up? What hands did he play against me? Is he like, dude, this past session, I'm only because that's the only 8.5 hours that I have to even talk about, is that literally 2 hours that I played against this guy that was sitting 2 seats over from me that got to the point that I would raise, someone would raise or something, I would call, the guy would look and see if I'm in the hand and go, and if it was heads up, would not play a hand against me. Only because I beat him on like 3 or 4 hands in the course of like 2 hours. And he's like, I ain't playing again. He's like, but friendly. He wasn't being like pissed off. He was joking around. It's right. He was the worst player at the table. He was very, very loose and overplayed and over aggressive. I ended up stacking him twice after that. But whatever the point is, like it gets to that point. But the nuance of like, how does that player think? How does this player think? Oh, a guy sits down next to me. I've been playing at the table for 6 hours. His image of me is going to be much different than this guy's image of me who's seen me play for 6 hours. So when this guy 3-bets me next to like he has a hand, like no one 3-bets light, but the guy that I've been fucking destroying, when he 7x 3-bets me pre-flop, like I'm like, I think he thinks I have shit. Like I open his range more but the guy next to me, I don't like that puzzle. To me, that puzzle is something that I almost feel like is only in live poker and so much less in online poker. Do you feel the same? Like you understand what I'm talking about, right?
Absolutely. Online poker is pretty sterile, right? It's the numbers on your HUD, and maybe some hand history if you're like a reg at the stakes, but like by and large, live poker is just so visceral, right? Does the guy have a drink in his hand? Is he frustrated? Is he angry? Like, is he stuck? Is he up? Is he feeling himself?
Is he thinking? The thing about online poker is that you can't tell if someone's thinking because they may be playing 8 tables and just waiting to get around to hitting a button.
Yeah.
But there's so much, the difference between, like, I could describe a hand and I could change the entire context of the hand by saying, I bet half of the pot on the turn, and the guy thinks for 10 seconds and then calls. And it's much different than I bet half the size of the pot on the flop and guy next to me immediately calls. Like that, if you played live poker, there's a huge difference between those two things.
Huge.
Right. But you don't, but the people that just play online, they don't get those. Like you just don't get that.
Yeah, people are playing multiple tables, or maybe they just like let their time bank go to the same spot every time, whatever that is. But in the live situation, you're considering the guy's almost always capped when he snap calls because he didn't take his time to consider raising there. You know what I mean? It's just it's those small things, and I also think it's just so like social and fun, and there's just so many aspects to consider, and the more of those aspects you're good at taking in, the better you're going to do. And I think you probably have a pretty natural proclivity to understanding those things about other players. And that's going to help you be successful, even if your like theory of poker is more rusty, right?
Right.
The fact that you understand people so well, and the energy that they're putting off or the spots that they're in, that'll kind of take you a long way.
I use the third level well
Yeah,
against average players.
what do they think? What do I think that they think that I have?
I call what I do simulating lines. So like that. Since you talk about hands, why don't we talk about some hands?
Buddy, let's go.
Okay, so this is what here's I have two hands. You
Yes.
come up with two hands. What I want to do as an experiment is I'll go through a hand and go get to an action, get to someplace, and then ask you, like, so what do you do? And then you could ask me questions about any context about anything. And then I'll go through and I'll say what I think, and then we'll go very. Like I said, I love the format of how you tell your stories. Other than you miss a third level context that I would love, but other than that, like, it's very easy to like. I've listened to other podcasts that go over hands, and it's so spreadsheety in a way that I'm not necessarily accustomed to. That I don't need all the spreadsheety stuff. Like I want give me the broad, basic, directional, conceptual stuff, rather than, well, he has 38 combinations of this, and he's 63% in this range. Like, you could just say he's more likely to have these types of hands and less likely to have those types. Like, don't fucking spreadsheet this up. I don't need to know the precise shit. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, one of the reasons I kind of decided to do my podcast the way I do is because I've listened to other poker podcasts and they'd spend 45 minutes talking about a single hand, and I was like, fuck this. Like,
right.
Yeah, I just can't with it. Like,
so
no.
do you have a hand? I want you start. Do you have a hand in question that you could think of?
No, I actually don't. Let me see if I can.
And try to come up with, like, maybe a hand. It could have been from your past podcast or whatever, or at least a hand that is more representative. So I'm assuming we're gonna get to a hand where you're fucking bluffing like a motherfucker.
I mean, yeah, obviously. Okay, all right.
Okay.
We'll just. I'm just looking at my notes here of like some hands that I'm gonna put on the podcast, maybe.
Okay.
So hands I haven't put on there.
Okay.
But let's throw one out there. We're playing 2, 3, 5, 10. So there's a $10 straddle. This is at a card room.
Okay.
I have about 1.6K in front of me. I'm in middle position. I open to 35 with red 10s. Mm-hmm. And then there's a good, sharp player in the small blind who cold calls, and then a professional in the straddle calls as well. So 3 ways, we are in the middle. And the other 2 players are pretty good.
I got a question now. Okay, so we're going to stop the action. How often does small blind 3-bet? Is he the type of person that typically 3-bets out of the blinds?
Yeah, good question. So
this is what I mean by the context of, like, what is he like? Is he the type of person that will almost always 3-bet? Because, like, what I'm saying is I'm looking for an imbalance of, like, if he's the type of person like you, that's like, dude, I'm 3-betting out of the blinds like all the time. Like, if you were to just cold call, that would send up signals of, like, something's up in some way here. So I wanted to know if this is the type of person that would almost always 3-bet in that spot.
Yeah, I would say no. And the reason I don't know for sure is because I don't remember who the player is.
You don't remember what it is. So what's the difference?
I don't remember. If I knew who he was, I'd probably be able to tell you. But I'd say population-wise, I would say no, it is not uncommon for a small blind cold call. I'd say
okay. And what's the difference between the guy in the small blind and the straddle? You say one is strong and one is a pro. What's the contextual difference between the two?
One of them, if I say pro, then I know the guy's a professional. So he's like a regular who I know, like, plays for a living.
Okay.
As opposed to, like, a sharp guy who, like, plays pretty well but probably does not. This isn't his
just not recreation. Okay. I didn't know the difference. So basically, I would think in this. So you have what? 2? You got what do you got? What do you got again?
I have hand wise.
Yeah.
Pocket 10s.
Okay, you got pocket 10, so you get cold called by that guy. The guy in the big blind could. He's a pro player, but he's getting like 3-1, so his hand range could be pretty damn wide.
I assume so.
Right. The cold caller, though, is more
Yeah.
I'm concerned about. Uh, what? Here's another contextual question. What is their perception of you? What each of these guys' perception of you? So, like, do they think that you raise light? Do they think that you play too aggressively? Do they think of you with an imbalance? Whether or not you are imbalanced is a different story. But do they think of any imbalance in your game?
Yeah, I think they probably assume I'm a overly aggressive player.
Okay, so you have to think the cold caller almost has to have a strong hand, because if he thinks that you're three betting light, unless you call three bets way too often, like he would most likely he would blast through you more likely. I'm not saying he will, but you have to figure that he's much more like if he thinks that you're raising light too often. So like, am I at least on the right ballpark that the main guy that we're concerned about is the small blind cold call and not the big blind guy? His range is, I mean, he could have Jack 8 suited there, and there's no problem with that.
Absolutely. The small blind with two players, because there's the big blind and the straddle, with two players left to act.
Right.
And he's not closing the action. He's going to have to play the pot out of position. I assume he has a legitimate hand.
I'm assuming the type, and also a type of hand that maybe you're playing multi-way, so like an ace queen suited, like maybe pair eights, like that, like a hand that you don't really mind multi-way, but like if he had like ace 9 or something, like he's raising or folding, like in that sense.
I would assume.
Assume so. Okay.
Yeah.
Are you finding this fun? I like going through. Okay. Okay. What happens next?
So we're going 3 ways to a flop, and we have position. The two guys are out of position on us, and the flop comes. What is it? 9-5-3 rainbow. 9-5-3 rainbow. We have 2 red 10s, and they both checked us. There is 105 in the pot.
Okay, so they both checked. That's kind of standard. If the original player, if the small blind player had a medium strong hand, I would figure that based on what range of hands that you could have, he's more likely to bet than check, because in a 3-way pot, he wouldn't want you to check behind because you're most likely going to, with a 3-way pot versus a heads-up pot, you're going to be a little bit more honest. He doesn't view you as like a loose, like c-bet everything, spewy, whatever like that. So
but he does think I'm overly aggressive.
Oh, he does. Okay, so then maybe he's more likely to go for a check raise with a hand like well, it's a rainbow board, so it's if it gets checked to you twice. How often do you see bet like way too, like to them? Do you see bet way too often?
I'm kind of gonna structure it in the sense that I don't expect them to do a lot of folding, so I'm essentially gonna use a c-bet structure that's
so you're gonna bet small
strategy that's pretty structured. So I'm gonna be betting 2 overcards a lot. So it's 9-5-3. I'm gonna be betting 2 overcards a lot that have backdoors. So whichever 3 suits are on the board, I'm gonna do a lot of betting with Queen Jack suited, Jack 10 suited, 10-8 suited, 7-8 suited, etc. I'm going to use those as my kind of c-bet bluffs, and then I'm going to likely bet obviously my good hands, my overpairs, my 9x, etc. for value. I'll probably bet my 5x for value too. If I had something like ace 5 suited with a backdoor, I would absolutely be betting it here. So I'm going to kind of structure like that, and I'm going to use a lot of my missed overcards that don't have backdoors, i.e. ace queen offsuit, ace jack offsuit, ace king offsuit. I'll probably put those in a checking range and kind of
this is going to show the difference between how we think about poker.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You're becoming a spreadsheet, and I'm not.
Yeah.
What I would do based on your description is. What is there? What, $60 in the pot or something? It's a $20.
No, there's 105.
Oh, 105. Okay. I'd probably bet 50, 40, 45, like something like that. Half pot.
Well, your hero does bet exactly 45.
Okay, so like that's what I would do, because this is my thought process. It's a dry board, pretty much. They're going to expect that you're going to bet on a dry board with your range anyway. Like you're gonna have over pairs. You're gonna have top pair. You're gonna have you're a much wider range. So like you could have hit the 9. You could have hit some of these cards, and you're more likely to bet with an over, especially with two players in. You're gonna if you have a hand like you have, you're privy to jacks, queens. You're privy to so many overcards that if you could get one fold, you're in a much better spot. You don't necessarily want both of them to fold, nor do you want both of them to call. But like if you bet here and both of them fold, you had the best hand, and you're most likely not going to induce a bluff. You're probably not going to make any more value. It's not going to matter. But you would rather be up against one opponent on the turn than right now, and especially with the big blind that has an even wider range of hands of you, maybe you do get calls. If the first guy folds, the big blind may still call you with a 9, with a 5, with a smaller pair, because he may think that you may have ace king or that type of hand. But the main guy in the small blind is harder to call and he has a much narrower range. So it's hard for him to call with ace queen with a backdoor because he has another player against. So that the small bet, the bigger bet, it makes no sense because essentially when you bet a pot size bet on a dry board over there, you're kind of a little too polarized. Like you're kind of like if you get called, you're either way behind or way ahead. I
agree with all that analysis.
Is that I'm asking you because remember I haven't talked like this about poker in like 15 years. So like I'm just tell me if I'm wrong. I'd rather you just tell me like no that was stupid and you're wrong.
No, absolutely not. And when we really filter it down to its core, it's look, I have a hand that benefits from betting, right?
Right.
It benefits in a theoretical sense because I usually have the best hand and it's vulnerable to overcards, so I want to bet. But then also we have two players who probably think I'm overly aggressive, so I really want to bet my good
right,
hands.
you want to get called by Jack 9. Like you want to get called by Jack 9 there. You want to get called by second pair. You want to get called by ace 5. You want to get that call. But you don't want to get two calls. You almost want to get one call.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't get to choose that, right? But right. I think your point about sizing is correct that I want to be able I essentially want to bet on the smaller side because I want to keep their ranges wide. Right. These guys want to call me with any pair, so let's let them.
Let them call you with any pair.
Yeah. That's what we want. Okay. And even if I was playing around with a bluff, right? If I had something like Jack 10 suited with a backdoor on 9-5 deuce, is it 9-5 deuce?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, it's a 9-5-3.
Okay.
9-5-3. If I do that, I still want them to call me with any pair because I'm going to be able to on a lot of runouts show significant aggression on the turn and or
right,
river.
and then the overcards become scares to them, and you end up winning the pot in position anyway.
Exactly. So I do bet 45, and our friend in the small blind check calls it, and the straddle folds.
Okay, the small blind check called. Okay.
Yep. Small blind check calls. So he definitely has something, right?
He has something.
Because
either he has something or he's setting up a big check raise bluff.
Sure, but we talked about pre-flop that his range is going to be a lot stronger than the straddles, and then also when he check calls here, it's going to be stronger because he still has the straddle who could potentially check raise. He's not closing the action, etc. So he's essentially saying he's got a little something. It doesn't have to be huge, but he's got something that he likes here.
Right.
Certainly.
Okay.
So it was 9-5-3 rainbow on the flop. We bet 45. We get called. We have red 10s. And the turn comes the 6 of diamonds, putting a second diamond on board. So 9-5-3 and then 6.
Okay.
And the small blind checks again.
I mean, if he thinks you're light, has he seen you double back? Have you shown down a double or triple barrel bluff?
I mean, in this specific session, no.
Okay.
But
does he view you as the type to triple barrel?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, so that means his calling range is going to get much wider. He's much more likely when you bet the turn. I mean, like he puts you on air much more frequently than you really have air. So you actually benefit more by betting here than, I mean, that's how I would view it. Is like the only reason you would check here is to induce a bluff on the river, but there's no draws that he'd be realistically calling with that would end up bluffing the river anyway. So my inclination right here is bet like 80.
Yeah, go about half pot. So
Yeah.
so when he check calls 9-5-3 rainbow, what's your opinion of his range? What's your opinion of what he's doing this with?
Small pairs and 2 big overcards.
You think he's calling with two overcards when the straddle's left to act?
Too big. I mean, I don't know how he. I mean,
honestly, because.
Well, I'm just saying. Maybe I'm giving you way less credit than what. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what. Because, dude, Ace King against you with air could still be the best hand. I mean, like that. That's what I mean. Like, I don't know the context of what your image is, but I mean, I mean, when he calls there, I mean, he has to have something that he thinks has. Here's a better way of putting it. He has something that he thinks he has showdown value. I'm putting Ace King in his range. I'm putting Ace King, Ace Queen in his range because maybe he gives you much less credit because you could have Ace Little. You could have. I mean, dude, they may put you on God. Who knows what the fuck they put? You could have, Queen Jack right here.
Right.
Queen 10. I mean, could have like God knows what. I don't know how much credit they're giving you.
I'm actually not sure as well. I think that they think that I'm a pretty tough, aggressive player, that I probably am more aggressive than the population. I don't necessarily think they think I'm a crazy blaster by any stretch.
But the thing is, there's enough hands that you beat that can call you right here. Yep. That worst case scenario, if you are beat by a medium strong hand, you're probably getting checked to on the river anyway, and you get to showdown. If you check here, and a lot of cards you don't like, you're privy to get a pot-sized bluff on the river that could easily be a thin value bet with jacks. That's the type of thing I would do. Like, I'm thinking in terms of how I would play against you. If you check there, and I had jacks in my hand, and the river was a blank, I would do a pot-sized bet because I think I could even get value out of Ace 9 because you think that I don't have a hand enough times. But now we're getting into, I'm profiling what he would do, but I'm just saying it's too much. It's too easy to me. A check here is too easily exploitable that you almost have to bet on this card. The sizing is up to you. You have to bet.
Yeah, and I love that we disagree here. I love that we disagree.
Oh, you check back? Oh, okay.
I decided to check, and I love your thought process behind it because I think this is important. And the way that I think about it is, whose range is this card better for? And I think it's clearly his, right? A pre-flop calling range is going to benefit from this medium to low board much more so than
why
pre-flop ranging range.
Why?
What do you mean? Because
his range, but no. His range is better than your range.
No,
because
it's shaped differently. It's shaped differently because he's not going to have big overpairs like aces, kings, etc. Whereas I will, because he's going to need to 3-bet those hands at a pretty high frequency. But he's going to not contain some of the other hands that I have that he wouldn't necessarily call with.
Yeah, but he has a stronger hand than that.
What do you mean?
We've already deduced that if he had against your wide range of a pre-flop raise, he is a hand that is stronger than yours and more likely to be better multi-way. So like he does that card on the turn helps you more than it helps him.
I don't think so because you think I have this really wide raising range from middle position. That's not what you'd have. It's what he thinks you have. He's more. I could tell you, he's more scared of that card than you are. See, I'm not so sure about that because
then you're not a lag. Then you're not that laggy.
Well, I mean, maybe I'm not, right?
Okay, well,
I'm
that's why the context meant like I'm going under the assumption that you're much laggier than maybe the context of the hand. Like that's how I'm thinking of what would he think? He would think to me a check from you in his mind is actually stronger, being that he could possibly think that you would triple barrel no problem with any hand. That a check actually means that you actually have something of showdown. You have something of showdown. A check would mean you have something of showdown value, and as long as a blank comes out on the river, like you're not gonna get bluffed out. A bluff is less likely to work now. Yet if you bet, it's gonna be hard for him to bluff first to act on any, even on an overcard, because it hits you on a if you were bluffing the flop and the turn, the overcard actually helps you out more than it would help him out, which means even if it did help him, he would still be forced to check and you just show your tens and win or lose the hand. So like that's why like in his mind the check is actually a stronger action than a bet.
So I'm not so sure of that, only because I'm not double barreling a lot of air here, because this card
Does he know that? Does he know that?
That I don't know. Yeah,
But
I don't know.
Sammy, you understand? Like I could listen to your hands and go, I'm constantly thinking, what does that guy think you have? What did and how could you play your line as a hand that he like on a if you have, let's say you had, so Sammy, let me if you had ace king here, I'm using that as a standard double, Broadway overcards type of hand. If you had a ace king like hand, how would you have played this hand? 9-5-3.
You would check back flop at a really high frequency.
You would have checked back the flop on a really high frequency?
Yep.
Do they know that?
Probably not.
Right. They would probably think that C bets come in ace king, two players, no matter what. Okay, so now they're more likely to think that you have ace king than tens here, right? So if they're going to put you on, you're more. I'm not saying they do or they don't, but more likely to put you on ace king. How would they think? What would the line be if to them if you had ace king after the player in the small blind calls? If he thinks that you're much more likely to shut down and check back the turn, then with tens you want to simulate the ace king line, and with ace king you want to simulate the tens line. Right? Because that's what he's thinking.
I don't think about that. I want them to be the same if I were going to play them the same. You know what I mean?
Right. And to me, I go back and I try to go, what do they think the line is, that because I want them to misplay the river on this street because I'm in position. So I want them to misplay the river. The problem is that when you check, if you check with ace king on, and they think you have ace king on the, if they misread your hand for ace king, a hand like they're going to be more scared of overcards, and if a blank comes, they're more likely to bluff because it's going to be hard for you to call with ace king, and they're first to act, and they don't have the option of seeing if you check or not. So that's the main reason why with tens, I'm much more likely, if they think that you're laggy, to just double barrel, because that's what that they think you. And I'm saying that you would do, because it's not about what you would do; it's about what they think you would do.
They think I would do, and
right.
Maybe I'm not smart enough to know what they think.
Well, I don't know, but these are the types. I'm just talking through. I'm not saying what you did was wrong or right or anything, but this is the way that I'm just showing the way that I think about how I make decisions. You're thinking in a broad sense, Sammy. You're correct. In a broad sense, if you take away what I'm talking about, I think checking back right there, because you have to give him credit for at least a 9, and there's not many other hands that you could beat. So you're more likely to just want to go to showdown, check river, and just show your cards. I think that's correct broadly.
Well, maybe yes and maybe no. So kind of what I was thinking through the course of the hand is I don't know that I necessarily have a 3-street hand. Like I don't know that this guy's going to like call down 3 big bets, right? Because he's a pretty good player. He's not just the type who's like, oh, I got 9-8,
right.
9 with no kicker. I'm just going to like call off big stacks. So I almost wanted to deleverage the hand and
You want to
get
control the size of the pot to make it smaller. So whatever river bet, even if you had to call, is just going to be smaller, and any value bet that you make is going to be smaller also.
right, because maybe I misspoke earlier, but the 6 doesn't necessarily benefit range versus range, but it benefits his range versus my hand
Right.
specific,
Right.
if that makes sense. Like
Yes.
what he's calling on the flop often improved with this card.
Right, because he could have top pair with the open and straight draw now, or something like
Yeah,
that.
so yeah, because
Or a
it came
gutter
9,
or
5,
something.
3,
Right.
this 6 like completes a lot of hands. 6-5 suited and
Yeah, but
7 suited and
see the difference between me and you is I take those hands out of his range when he cold calls your in the small blind. I'm not saying I take it out, but I'm just like the probability of those hands I think goes down.
interesting. Yeah, I think yeah, I think this guy would probably play him, but
No, he would three bet you with
play
the.
him.
No, the thing is that type of player would most likely three bet you with those hands. So that's why that's what I more likely, like we're saying, more likely, less likely. And of course, we're playing against a stronger player, so his actions could have some deception to them also. So like we're not just completely just putting him on something.
Well, and that's the other part is, like he could certainly be using a hand with pair plus equity as a check raise bluff, and I really don't want to get check raised here. Right? You do not want to face a check raise because it kind of puts me in an untenable spot where if he's got bluffs in his range, I could be folding the best hand a lot, but he has hands like 2 pair, right? He has hands like 6-5 suited. He's got the sets, right? 9s, 5s, 3s. I assume he'd be peeling the flop bet with 6s. He's got all the sets in his range. He can do all that. So if he's like using some check raises, he actually puts me in a pretty tough spot. So my idea was I'm going to check back here, and then we're getting a bet in on the river. Either he checks to me and I bet river and he calls because he thinks I'm BS, or he bets out on river and I can call.
Right. Well, it depends on if an overcard hits. It depends if a 4 straight hits. It depends. I mean, we still have some.
Yeah.
There's still the board is very dynamic.
Yeah. So the way it goes, 9-5-3 on the flop. I bet he check calls. The turn is a 6, putting a second diamond on board. So 9-5-3, 6, 2 diamonds. He checks, I check, and the river comes the 4 of diamonds. So, and I've read 10, so I do have the 10 of diamonds in my hand.
But there's a 4. There's a 4 straight out there. 2, 3. Isn't there a 4 straight? No.
Yes. Yes. 4, 6. So a 7. Any 7 in his hand makes a straight.
Okay. And it's 3 diamonds now.
And there's 3 diamonds.
Okay. Then now what happens? Do you have the 10 of diamonds in your hand?
I do have the 10 of diamonds.
Okay. So what happens? What is
he leads 160 into 195. $160 and $195 makes a nice solid bet, nice chunky soupy bet.
I would fold. And you want to hear the reasoning?
Yes.
Okay. I would fold. To me, it's either fold or raise. I don't think calling is an option here. You could call only with pure bluff. I mean, obviously, right now you have a bluff catcher. There's no way a 9 isn't betting here for value. A set
pocket 8.
Pocket 8's right. Like none of those. No 1 pair hand or even a 2 pair hand is betting for value here. Now against sophisticated opponents, I would bet top set here. Like against you, I would bet top set, knowing that the likelihood of you having a 7 is so not in your range, but you also know that my range doesn't have a 7 as often either. So if you have a better hand, you're more likely to call as a bluff catcher, and my hand is not the straight, but is actually the hand that will still get called by 2 pair, by over pairs. Like that, this is 3rd level if I was in his situation. But I still have to consider that as a possibility. Go inside his head, going, if this dude has aces, and I don't have a 7, but I've been slow playing something better than aces, I could get value here because the likelihood of you having a 7 versus me having a 7 is much lower. So once you add that into his strategic arsenal, you go, did he just peel with ace queen on the flop? Probably not. It's maybe it's slight, it's whatever like that. But I think if he had ace 9, something like a 9 in his hand, he's much more likely on that card, based on your image, to check and let you bluff and then call with the bluff catcher than to simulate a value bet on the river. So to me, at least, based on how this hand was described in the context of what you think of him and what he thinks of you, it's hard for him to have a hand worse than 10s. So to my attitude is that either your raise here, like to me the raise, it's the guy, I can't see him putting you on a 7. So even if he had a set, I think he probably calls your raise based on your image on the check. So that's why like I'd lean more likely to fold, but I can understand, depending on your frequency, that a raise is a bluff raise is definitely possible here. But it's hard for me to think that he has nothing on that board, that he has air, that your 10s would be good with a call.
Yeah, I agree with you that I don't think he's betting one pair for value. A, the bet is too big, the board is too scary, and furthermore, because I bet flop and check back turn, what he thinks of me is probably that I often have missed overs, right? I just took one shot on the flop, got a call, board ran out bad for 2 overcards, and I just decided to check and give up. So he wouldn't want or need to bet one pair.
Right.
If he thinks I have 2 missed overs, he doesn't want to bet one pair.
And also, if he thinks you have 2 missed overs, he could bet a third of the pot and get a fold anyway.
Exactly. So I don't think he has that. I think that it's very difficult for him to have a hand that's actually a bluff here, right? Because he's not betting 9x or pocket 8s for huge value. I wouldn't call with worse, but there's a lot of value he can have, right? He can have all the flop sets. You can have pocket 7s that turn into a straight, 6-7 suited, 5-6 suited, 9-7 suited. He's got more 7s than me. And I also don't think that a bluff raise, even though I have the 10 of diamonds, right? That's a good bluffing card because he shouldn't have higher diamonds than that very often in his hand, the way this hand's gone down. It's a kind of good blocker. That being said, I think his range here is just too strong to try to bluff. So I do the thing that you probably don't expect me to do, and I do fold.
No, you're too good to not fold there.
Yeah. So it's tough to fold over pairs, man. But I do think you're right that calling, really good analysis. Calling is the stone worst play. Your pair of 10s is never good here. He's not value betting a worse hand, and he's what hands does he have that became bluffs here? Like no hands arrive here that are bluffs unless he like
ace queen of diamonds. Like ace queen of diamonds would be like, but you'd have to profile him as a peeler, and he doesn't seem like the type of player that would be a peeler.
Totally, and
not with another guy, not with the other guy in the hand. Also, like that's
right. And think of the mental gymnastics it takes to get there. Like, he didn't 3-bet pre-flop,
right?
And then he just flatted the flop with another player behind him, and then turned it into a big ass bluff on the river. Like, maybe it happens sometimes, but not enough.
Right.
Not enough. So that's the hand. It's the first one that jumped out on my notes, and I found a discerning fold, even though I'm not very good at folding sometimes.
We mostly agreed on everything, right?
Yeah. And even the turn mechanics, like, should I? If we agree,
like we're arguing over like a 60-40 at best. Like I understand like you should probably check. I think you should check 40% of the time and bet 60%. And you're talking about the opposite type of thing.
Sure. And we agree that it's a 2-street hand. So does it play better bet turn and check back river, or does it play better, check turn and bet river if check 2? And those are the little minutia things, but yeah. Yeah, we got there. We both arrived at a fold on the river.
Right. So now I'll do my hand. Now maybe it's going to be fun to you.
All right.
To go.
I'm
interested. I'm interested. We may actually both of us would have played the hand the same way, but let's see. Okay. So playing 1-2, no limit. Caesar Southern Indiana. It's a 300 max buy-in game. I'm sitting with 800. And it's a I'm in the okay, so under the gun. Yeah, you're so much better at the story aspect of like, okay, I need to get all the information.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay, so under the gun, who is I would say NIT, like OMC, whatever you want to, like you use that term, OMC, with 200 in front of him, or 200, a little over 200 in front of him, makes it 15 to go. Okay, under the gun. Okay, it gets folded around to me. I'm in the hijack, and I have 2 black 7s. Okay, context. The guy in the big blind, loose passive, one of the players that I'm targeting. Guy in the button is a loose, semi-aggressive, but below average player, right? Someone that overplays one pair too much, calls too much for any draw, and he has about 750 in front of him. So I'm looking to play against those players. I'm not looking to play against OMC under the gun. But, dude, this ain't going to be fucking heads up. So I'll take my 7s, and I want these people in, right? Because, especially with OMC first to act, essentially he's playing his hand face up, right? He has aces, kings, queens, or ace-king, and let me tell you, half the time he has ace-king, he's limping for $2. Like, that's how weak, and that's how narrow this guy is, okay?
Yeah.
So I don't care. So it's going to cost me $15 to try to bust someone, and I'm never going to lose any more money than I should against the Brazier. So I don't give a shit. Why am I 3-betting? That would make absolutely no sense. So I call.
Yeah, and I would agree with you here.
Okay.
This isn't a hand or situation I'd want to use as a 3-bet. I think, I do talk about 3-betting at a really high frequency from any position that's not the button or big blind. But in this situation, like, all the things are stacked against you. Is under the gun ever folding his super tight, strong range? No, right? Are we playing with depth so that we can really put pressure across him on future streets when he holds an overpair? No, right? We're only 100 big blinds deep at this point. Absolutely not. Do we have players behind us that are deeper, that are going to stack off lighter? Yes. And then do small to medium pairs like 7s really play that well in 3-bet pots? No. In fact, pairs are one of the hands, like smaller pairs are one of the hands that, I use a lot as flats because they just don't perform well in 3-bet pots. They don't really flop equity. They're very binary, right? Either you flop a set or you don't. They're not something that, I flopped 2 overs and a backdoor flush draw. I can keep barreling here with a lot of outs. It just doesn't happen.
And also, you flop over cards like 80+% of the time anyway. And even if you don't flop over cards, that means there's a 3 straight on the board most of the time, right? So, like, right.
Yeah. So this is absolutely a call. Yeah.
Okay, so you're with me. Okay. So I call the guy sitting next to me with $150 in front of him, very weak tight. Like not even OMC, just really weak. Like, doesn't play many hands, but plays really weakly. Okay? He calls He's the favorite guy to play against. He calls the 15 are very loose guy that's playing 85% of hands, calling pre-flop with any 2 cards practically. Not a horrible player, still, has some sense to him, but still, like, just to him, he's here to gamble, right? That type of player. So he calls the 15, the blinds fold. So we're going 4-way to the flop, $60 in the pot. The guy next to me has 150. The pre-flop raiser is 200. I have 800, and the button has like 750. I cover him, but barely. Okay. The board comes 10, 8, deuce with 2 hearts. Pre-flop raiser OMC checks. What do you do?
I usually check.
Right. I would usually check here also, but given the context of the opponents in the hand, because explain why you go through your explanation of why you check.
Yeah, because it's not a board that I feel like I get a lot of folds out of, right? Because this is a board 10-8 deuce. The 10 and the 8 are going to interact with a lot of calling ranges, right? All 10x is going to call, all 8x is going to call from these loose players. All 2 overs with a backdoor, 2 overs with a straight draw. We're just going to get called a lot here and not have a lot of definition on future streets. And it's a dynamic board, right? Overcards will fall. Things will fall where our hand doesn't necessarily like them, right? The more the board changes, the more it's going to benefit the players in position. Plus, we're in a multi-way pot, so I tend to play a little more honestly. I would way rather bet a hand. It's 10-8 deuce with 2 hearts. I would definitely rather bet a hand like Queen Jack with backdoors or Queen Jack suited, etc. Something that has outs that can improve more than pocket sevens. If I were to bet pocket sevens, I think it would probably be a one and done. You know what I mean? Because when I get called, I just have very little clarity about, does this guy have a pair? Does he have a bullshit draw? Like, the ranges don't really get defined that well, and it's not a hand that you really want to double barrel, triple barrel, etc. So that's kind of my thinking.
Good thing you're playing. The guy in the seat is very good at defining ranges. So it's a $60 pot. I bet 40. Okay, so I'm betting not small, not over bet, but on a larger size, because I'm not going to bet here that frequently in a 4-way pot with third pair essentially. So here's my thinking. The OMC obviously has ace king, because you might as well just turn your hand up.
Obviously.
Okay, so he has ace king. The guy sitting next to me. Okay, so my goal right now is I improve the equity of my hand against the button if I could get both the pre-flop raiser and the guy next to me to fold. Because the guy on the button, his range is fuck everything, right? And he's more likely to misplay later street. I mean, dude, I want to get as many situations with this guy as possible, okay? So the pre-flop raiser has ace king. If it goes checks around, I'm privy to his range falling, and me. If I had the best hand here, I can't even bet the turn on any overcard whatsoever. The guy next.
By the way, do you have a heart in your hand?
No, I have 2 black sevens.
Okay.
Right. If I bet what is likely in the minds of all 3 of my opponents is that I have a 10. And that's what I want. I want you to think that I have a 10. The guy on the button, he may not care that I have a 10, and he may call with an 8, he may call with a deuce, he may call with pocket 5s, he may call with 2 overcards.
He seems like the type.
Right, he could call with a lot of the stuff like that. But the guy next to me probably has 2 big cards in his hand, right? Because he called a raise, and the type of player like that probably has some hand like he shouldn't be playing multi-way, but he thinks he can, like a king-jack type of hand, an ace-10 type of hand. But these are all overcards that hurt me. My point is to just get all of that equity out so I could just go, my hand is most likely good against the button more times than not. So if I bet 40 here, I'm more than likely, the guy next to me, if he calls, I'm done. Right? Because my hand is probably no good against his call. And then the guy behind him calls also. Now I'm first to act on the turn. What? Unless a 7 comes, I mean, I don't even know what I could bet here. So my purpose of my bet is to basically get the guy next to me to fold. Right? Fold a hand that hurts me on the turn and possibly also folds an 8. Because he'll think that I have a 10. Because why? That's what you do on the flop. You bet top pair, right? Oh, pre-flop raiser checks. I bet. This guy goes, oh, he must have a 10. And he folds 7-8 or he folds ace-8. That would be beautiful. If he could fold an 8, it would be beautiful. But if he has overcards, if his queen jack and the preflop raiser is king, look how many cards hurt me. The guy's range on the button is fuck all. He could call me with God knows what. Let me get value out of him, right? So that's why I'm betting the 40. And lo and behold, guy next to me folds, right? Button calls the 40. Preflop raiser folds. Okay?
Folds.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there we got that.
No,
So
you always get folds. Yeah.
140 in the pot. Effective stack size is what? About 700. Next card comes out is an offsuit 4. Okay, so we have 10, 8, deuce, 2 hearts, offsuit 4. Doesn't make a backdoor or anything like that. Okay, now what do you do? 140 in the pot.
Let me ask this question. Is this guy, do you feel like he's likely to bluff rivers? Like say he had a flush draw, just for example, right? 10, 8, deuce 4. Say he's got some sort of flush draw, you bet the turn, he calls. How likely do you think if a blank comes on the river and you check that he turns his hand into a bluff? Is he that type?
Yes.
Or is he just like, okay.
He's more likely to do that. And also, he's much more likely that if he had a hand like ace 10 on the flop, he most likely would have raised my bet. So so to me, the best hand that he could have within reason, he could obviously have a set. Like we have all the really top end, he's slow playing type hands.
Yes, but I would say slow plays are a little less likely on this board, just like the population when they see a flush draw and a somewhat.
No, I don't care about the population. I care about this guy. These people are fucking illogical. If now you have the type of people that are scared of flush draws and want to raise people out. This seems like the type of guy that when he's scared, it's with one pair type hands, not super strong hands. So to me, when he calls me on the flop, the best medium strong hand he could have is a weak 10. Like he's scared. He thinks I have a 10, but he's not sure if his 10-7 is good, but he can't fold the 10, so he continues. He could call me with an 8, but he could also call me with any hearts. He could call me with any he could call me with 2 overs, a gut shot draw,
7-9, even though you block it.
Right.
So as played, I think I probably play this through a bet check line. So I think there's a lot of, because here's the thing, like we're in this pot now. If we bet here, I think we very rarely see a raise. You know what I mean? Because of the type of hands that you're talking about, right? He's going to have some weak 1 pair hands, and then he's going to have draws. And most of the time, those draws, if they're going to play through a semi-bluff, they're going to semi-bluff the flop, not now do it on the turn. Not always, but I'd say the vast majority of the time. So what I want to do is actually bet for value at this point, as we've arrived here, against his draw-heavy range. And then I want to check, I think, pretty much all rivers. And because when they create a draw, when they create a misdraw, he's likely to bluff at it. And when they don't, he's made his draw or whatever that looks like. And there's no value left. We've wrung all the value out. So that's kind of the line I'm going to take here. There's about 140 in the pot, and I think we can size up pretty well. That's what I want to do, because what I want to do, I don't expect his draws to fold, but I do want to get some of his weak 8x hands like that. We don't want to get them to a cheap showdown. So I would probably bet about 2/3 pot, somewhere around 100.
Okay, I bet 80. Right. And the only reason I didn't bet 100 is because from a nominal standpoint, once you get into the triple digits, that seems like a much bigger bet. So I want to bet big enough, but not something that he thinks is a big bet for this game, right? So I bet 80. So it's like we're on the same wavelength, right? Exact same wavelength. And
he calls.
Right, and he calls. Okay. And we're also on the same wavelength that we're planning on checking the river, right? Yeah. I'm on 100%, but we're going to get it's going to get a little tricky now. Okay?
Okay. I love tricky.
Get a little tricky. But we're both on the same wavelength, okay? River comes, it's a black king. Okay?
Black king, we check, and he bets
200. He bets 200.
Yep. I mean, I think it's a pretty clear call. And the reason I think it's a pretty clear call is because unless he has specifically a king high flush draw that made top pair, this king doesn't help his hand. Maybe king 10, but we're getting pretty thin here. I think there's a lot more hands that he can have that his weak one pairs, his 10x, his 8x, they're just checking back, right? So we don't have to worry about him betting 10x for big value here, right? What we think his range is heavily comprised of is weak one pairs when he calls, and he's not left with a lot of those, and certainly they don't bet big on the river. So he's left with a lot of missed draws. A lot of his queen jacks, a lot of his jack nines, a lot of flush draws, ace 3 of hearts, and queen jack of hearts and queen 7 of hearts, like this sort of shit that this guy has. He's just got all that in range. And if he's the type that has a proclivity to bluff here, I just don't think this king changes his range. It's not an advantage card to his range. So I'm check calling.
Okay. Well, I called.
Yeah.
And the reason
you queen fucking 6 of hearts and you take the pot. Easy game.
The reasoning is you have that what I call the spreadsheety version of it is that if he had king 10, if he had a 10, I most likely get raised on the flop with this type of player. If he had an 8, I could see him calling the flop and the turn, but I see no reason why why we would bet 200 on third pair on the river. Like that 8x doesn't make any sense.
1-2 players are not turning 8x into a bluff on the river.
Right, exactly. And or 2x or some bottom pair hand or something like that. The only thing that he could have that beats me right now is if the king improved. So like if he had king 8, king deuce, right? Like he called with bottom pair and he turned the king. But I also have to take away half of those hands because the pre-flop raiser, I could probably bet my house has ace king, right? Because he folded. So one king is gone in my mind. So
you're getting a little spreadsheety here. I like this.
Right, I'm putting it right. So like, but that's how you have to think, right? So I go like, and also from a nominal standpoint, even though it's a 2/3 size pot bet, 200 is a big bet in this guy's mind. If this guy had king 8, he thinks I have a 10, right? Especially when I check the river when a king comes, because he'll go like, oh, well now he doesn't have top pair anymore. I'm going to check my whatever jack 10 hand, and if he had king 8, he'd probably bet like 100 here, right? He'd probably go like, how do I get a call from a 10, right? 200 to him is a bigger bet. It's not, size-wise, it's not polarizing, but to him it is. To me it is.
There's not a lot of 100 big blind bets in this game.
Right. So I don't really think that much about it. The whole purpose of checking was when a heart doesn't come, I call, right? So I called and he turns over queen 9 of hearts. So he had a gut shot.
Boom.
Gut shot and a flush draw that he missed.
Not your ass, Mr.
Right.
Postman. Really, really well played, Blender, and I really like. I think it's definitely next level to understand that when the original OMC raises under the gun and then check folds the flop, it's ace king the vast majority. Mm-hmm. To understand that card removal on the river, not that we especially needed it, but it's one more point in our favor. I mean, buddy.
Yeah, but the bet, see, the thing is that the bet on the flop is how I think about playing hands where I may not have the best hand against one player in this multi-way pot, but how do I get into as many heads-up situations against someone that I'm either ahead and will get called? Like, look at all the money I got. I got called with 2 decent half pot size value bet, thin value. I mean, look how thin those value bets were. And then I got paid off by inducing a bluff on the river by all the missed hands. And I go, how do I make any more money? Because if you check behind, like think in terms of checking behind. Also after the hand when I turned it over, the guy next to me said, "Nice bet." I folded an 8. So when you bet here, if I check there, what ends up happening is the guy next to me probably doesn't even bet an 8. That's how weak he is. The guy on the button may bet his draw. It gets folded by ace king, and now I'm in a situation where he could have way more better hands than I have. And now we're going to be out of position, not able to control the pot against someone that could have a draw. He could have whatever. And am I going to check raise here? If I check raise, I'm check. Right, exactly. Your face is like whatever. So like I'm definitely in a bad situation. And also if it gets checked through and the 4 comes, the pre-flop raiser still checks. I probably bet now because no one bet. The guy with an 8 probably calls because he thinks, well, if he had a 10, he would have bet anyway, right? So he calls. The other guy now how do I win the hand? I can't. And then how do I make a lot of money off of the bad player at the table? I can't. Like, I think the bet here, when I get called by the guy next to me, I lose $40 and I'm done. And so be it. But the guy is so goddamn weak that he's folding way too much to anything here that to me it's so unreasonable not to bet when you could play the first guy's hand face up and the guy next to you folds 90% of the time and you're up against a guy that you're probably good against currently 60+% of the time. But most people like you go multi-way pot, third pair, let me check. And it's like, Sammy, these are my reckless adventures. Because there's a lot of times I run into it. There's a lot of times I run into a set or something. There's a lot of times I call on the river and the guy shows me a set and I go, okay, right?
Yeah. I mean, that happens to me too. I will say in this hand, I do think the kind of key. I agree that betting the flop really led you to this situation, and I'm not actually against betting something other than top pair. For value here, I would just choose a different hand candidate. I'd choose something like 9-8 or 8-7 more often than I would pocket sevens.
Because I have more equity with those hands, right? Obviously.
Yeah, exactly. But that doesn't mean that the thought process behind the reason why you bet is poor. It's not at all.
Right.
I'd be a little more discerning theory-wise about which hand I used. But once you arrive to where you did on the turn, I think we were in complete lockstep in terms of like, okay, where are we now and how do we best take advantage of those situations? And like we talked about, the EV of making good choices on turns and rivers is going to trump the EV of making good choices on flops pretty much all the time, right?
Right.
And I really like the way you thought through it. And, fuck, man, like just how sick is it for this guy to flip over a stone-ass bluff and you to call him with fourth pair? And he's just like, how did this guy do that? When really it really just takes a certain kind of logic in terms of paring down. Would he do this with these types of hands? Would he do that with these types of hands? Like you said, you didn't even think about it that long on the river. I don't think you should.
Well, especially,
I think shows that you're thinking pretty deeply about what your opponents are likely to hold.
Right, and also the likelihood of my line in that hand is like, if you were to just look on a broad view from an average player's perspective, I called a pre-flop raise, bet on a 10 high, bet when checked to on a 10 high board twice, checked on a king. Like, he thinks ace king, ace 10. He thinks like ace.
Yeah, he thinks you have 10x. 10x
right, 10x, and probably a good 10x because it's like, oh, he's a good player. He's probably not has 10 deuce or something, 10-4 or whatever. And he goes, well, once the king comes and I check, here's an opportunity to bet with queen high because I missed. Right? But the key is that he needs to think that I have a 10. So if I bet the river, like the likelihood of him bluff raising is way down in these types of games, then most likely he folds. So like the key is to simulate the line in his head that induces the bluff and make sure it's all consistent to that.
Right.
Because I was simulating a 10, which got the 8 to fold, and then didn't get the queen 9 to raise because probably he thinks that, well, if he has a 10, he probably doesn't fold to a raise anyway. So this is how bad players think.
By the way, this guy cucked it big time by not just.
But that's how bad players think. They go, this guy ain't folding a 10. What's the point of me raising my draw? If he had a
Right.
bigger draw, if he had the like open-ended straight flush draw, he probably would have raised anyway, or ace king of
Hey, how
hearts.
much bigger of a draw do you want, buddy?
These are bad players, Sammy. They're bad players. They're bad players.
Tremendous stuff, Blender. This is really good. I love this.
Do you want to do another hand?
I can't. I do want to. I do want to. But my kid's up from a nap, and I don't want to be hashtag bad parent.
Bad. Oh, you're a bad parent. You're gambling your child's college fund.
I'm creating her college fund. But she actually turns 3 years old today. It's her birthday, so yeah, daddy's got to go and do some special stuff for her.
Okay, so Sammy, if you like, hey, anyone that's listening, if you like these types of hand analysis, just your podcast is like evergreen. Like you could listen. I mean, there's no, like, dude, you could listen to this 10 years from now. I mean, like I binge listen to all your episodes.
10 years from now, all the theory that I think is right is going to be proven bullshit. So we'll see about that. But yeah, I agree. It's something you can go listen to, and it'll hold value. A month from now, a year from now, etc. Yeah, that's what I do anyway.
And finally, what advice would you give to people that are coming from DFS? Like, think of the opposite. Like the situation that you were in 4 years ago. Like you came from poker, went to DFS, then came to poker. And I did the same thing. Well, what happens if you never came from poker to begin with and you played DFS well and you understand the theory of DFS stuff? What advice would you give people that maybe go, hey, if I'm good at DFS, I could be good at poker? Like, where would they go from here?
I mean, I would say get out in the streets. I mean, the thing that we found is what we talked about at the beginning. You go and God, the players are just so bad. Right, they're just so bad, and in a way, I think the live poker circuit is much softer than the DFS streets. Just 100%. Right? And so if you're somebody who either just enjoys the thrill of competition and gambling for money, or you're somebody who's like has their hand in a number of different things that you're trying to make a career out of, right? I don't think not anybody, but most people don't just play DFS for a living or just play poker for a living. They have different hustles, different side ventures, et cetera. If you're looking to expand that portfolio, I mean, live poker is kind of where it's at. And, I would start, I think. I like Ed Miller's books, man. Like, yeah. I love Ed Miller. God, he's somebody who you should maybe try to get on the podcast.
He's been on the podcast.
Has he? Shit. Yeah. Well, I need to go back and listen to that one. I missed that. I think he's fantastic, and I think one of the great skills of people who are really good at things is to be able to take something really complex and explain it simply. And I'm trying to get good at that. Who's a master is Ed Miller, and he's got books for like all shapes and sizes, all kind of points that people can be at in their poker careers. And so for me, that's where I'd start. Is just pick up the course. Or
well, I think small snakes, no limit hold'em is a better.
The first one,
yeah, the first one. I mean, it's not as modern. Dude, I wouldn't. You have to agree. I think it's much better to start and err on the side of being too weak and too tight. If you read the course, you're gonna be just triple barreling like way too. Like I read that and I said. Like, not in my games, bro. Hashtag not in my games. Like, I'm not going to triple barrel that. I mean, the theory makes sense, but, like, it's all in context. Until you're playing in the games where that's profitable long term, that's why small stakes, no limit hold'em, I think, it leads to you to play a little bit much more conservative-ish and tighter-ish. So that when you sit down,
probably small stakes, and then it's the course, and then it's poker's 1%. It's like the really advanced.
Well, I also to me is the Applications of No Limit Hold'em by Matthew Janda.
Oh, buddy, if you're just starting out in poker and you're
you don't want to read that book.
you're in for a thick milkshake.
Right. Okay, so Sammy Reid FI on Twitter. Subscribe to his podcast. It's great. And the Guildcast, obviously. Yeah, that's must listen content to know how much of a fish everyone is. So when you play the same players in cash and you go, oh, these guys did also. Does that make me good or bad or whatever? definitely check that out. So thanks for coming on, and I don't mind talking about poker with you anytime.
Dude, it was real awesome, Leonard. We could have got another couple of hours in. Pretty selfish of my daughter to have a birthday, I would say, but she's little, so we'll let her get away with it. But I really appreciate you having me on, man. It was great.
Okay, and as always, you get the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports 15-hour audio DFS masterclass at theoryofdfs.com.